Hello and welcome to the Moonshine Jesus Show. We're glad you joined us today for our look at Questlove's Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised. As always, I'm joined by Caleb. Caleb, how you doing, man? Good to see you.
Good to see you, Mark. I'm doing great. I can't wait to talk about this. Just a reminder, this podcast is brought to you by progressivechristianity.org. And we would love for you to give us any questions that you have throughout the podcast. And in our last segment, we'll address any any questions that you have. And Mark, what are you drinking today?
Well, I tell you what, I also want to add, before I tell you what I'm drinking, to make sure everyone knows that, as always, this is not a spoiler-free podcast. This will be full of spoilers. We don't edit ourselves. We just put it out there. Well, what I'm drinking is, so like we said, this is a film that was made by Questlove, he was one of the producers and the director. And there's some great stories out there about it coming together. So Questlove isn't a big drinker. But he does have a cocktail that he currently likes to have at night after everything is settled down. It is called it's called an electric honey.
Okay.
Electric honey. And it partly comes from he did a series for a Scotch group, a Scotch distillery, and did some things about creativity and has a mini series that's more than worth watching. That particular folks are way too expensive for my blood. So I have a less expensive, Scotch, and it is Scotch, two-thirds Scotch. Yeah. And then the other third is split with a simple honey syrup and chilled coffee. And then you can see here, for those who are watching, I have my cayenne pepper. And you top it with some cayenne pepper. And it's a sipper. It's actually really good. I was not sure, but it's great. How about you, man? What are you going to drink?
That looks really good. So I was really in the mood for a martini today. Nice. And so I've got a Harlem Nights martini. Ooh. And it's very simple to make. It's just 2 parts vodka, 1 part Kahlua, and it's delicious. It goes down very smoothly.
It sounds like it would.
I can't wait to get into Summer of Soul. Cheers to you, Mark. Cheers to all of you who are out there watching.
Cheers to everyone. Thanks for joining us.
We'll be back after the drop.
Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
So, Caleb, we're going to be talking about Summer of Soul, as we've mentioned a few times. I remember watching this the first time when it was released to Hulu and was just blown away. It was kind of going back and hearing the stories of Questlove and how this project came to him and his thoughts about it were exactly my thoughts, in that I was like, how in the world did something like this happen? And I've never
don't know anything about it.
Like one little tiny bit about it. What was your reaction?
I had no idea it happened either. And the same summer as Woodstock, 1969, a cultural pivotal moment, and this huge festival in Harlem, like 50,000 people a day kind of festival. I think they said there were 300,000 people who came throughout the course of the festival.
That's what they're estimating.
Some of the biggest names in black music at the time came through, and it was incredible to listen.
We're talking the Chamber Brothers, B.B. King, Mahalia Jackson, Gladys Knight and the Pips,
Sly and the Family
Mavis
Stone.
Staples, Nina Simone. I mean, we could go on and on. It's an incredible list. It happened over 6 Sundays, the summer of '69, and like you said, certainly an eventful summer for the history in general. But this was an event that was so massive and so important. It shouldn't have got lost.
No, and you know what's so cool about it, Mark? So you get to listen to the music throughout the documentary, which is one of the things that's the coolest about it. You get to sit here and kind of experience it because the footage has been locked away for like 50 years, and we get to see it. But one of the things that was the coolest for me was that all the different styles of music kind of got blended together, and it wasn't about a style of music; it was about kind of a cultural experience and capturing this moment in time. And that was powerful to sit and listen to and to see and to hear people reflect on their experiences there.
Yeah. And it was during a period of time when there was a lot of transition going on in Black culture in the United States anyway. There was a reclaiming of native roots, and maybe literally roots with the hair, and reclaiming natural hair, and that it's beautiful, and we shouldn't be made to feel like we can't do this. It was, as the film points out, there was a pivotal thing that happened that year, in part in response to this festival, which is the Harlem Cultural Festival. This was year 3 of it. They changed. This is a pivotal moment when we stopped saying Negro and started saying Black, and the culture itself asked for that. They were like, this is what we want. This is we're reclaiming that word. You're not going to use it against us. And there was even a fight at, what was it, the Washington Post?
At the New York Times.
New York Times,
yeah, that she had written an article, and she wrote the headline as Black. So-and-so many Black women are at this thing. And an editor, a white editor, changed it to Negro. And she said, no, we're going to use Black. And the person who was in charge at the New York Times said, okay, from now on, it's Black.
Yeah, she wrote an 11-page argument.
Memo.
When he changed it, he was like, we're going to keep it this way. She wrote an 11-page memo on all the reasons why it needs to change. And to his credit, mostly to her credit, obviously.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
As the person making the final decision, he read it, he realized he was wrong, and he went, okay, that's right. Let's go with it. So
and so one of the powerful things about the movie or the documentary is that it's about music, but it's not about just music, right? And that's what they're talking about the festival being about in general, is that it's about music, and it's a fun time. It was a fun gathering. It was meaningful to see so many Black people in the same place, because some of those folks had never been around that many Black people before. And so it was meaningful in that way. But also it was about this cultural moment, and it was about a desire for change in society. And that's pretty cool that this phenomenon happened, that they captured it on camera. It's just too bad it was lost for 50 years.
Absolutely. And I think we're being very generous when we say it was lost.
Intentionally. And they talk about it.
Yeah, it was intentionally lost. At least Questlove has said that after hearing all the stories and researching what went on and how it ended up in the basement of the guy who filmed it, basically, he says it's, for him, this is proof that revisionist history exists. Yeah. Because here's this massive story that's getting compared to Woodstock, and we need to talk about that a little bit too. But no one picks it up. No one will touch it. And it ultimately, because of it, the guy who filmed it, he tried hard, and he's the one that originally made the connection of calling it Black Woodstock, because Woodstock was getting played everywhere. It was getting all coverage. It was picked up everywhere, and he couldn't give it away, basically. And so he came up with this idea to call it Black Woodstock. That also did not help, and I would guess in some ways it might have hurt, particularly in those times. It made more people say, "Well, I'm not sure that I'm willing to have anything to do with that or put it out there." And so here's maybe our first big point of discussion. I really feel like when you consider what the film does and what was going on as the event was happening, comparing it to Woodstock is one of the worst things we can do.
Yeah, it's something different. Something different is happening.
It's completely different. And it's just referencing a white reference point to point to another music festival that hadn't really, I mean, Woodstock was a bunch of mostly city-ish suburbanites with the chance to go for a long weekend and protest a war that was over there, not here, that we're not actually dealing with ourselves, and pretend like they're hippies for a while. Whereas what was going on in the cultural festival was more about claiming who we are. It was about the real threats that were going on in their lives, which we'll get to and talk more about in our theological political segment. And it was a response to that. And it was this opportunity to express hope through music. It was very different. And it's so typically white culture to reference it against the thing that's closest to it in white culture, even though it doesn't make any sense to compare the two.
That's right. Yeah. Because while in some ways it was about Vietnam, and they talk about, how there were more black soldiers in Vietnam, and that felt like they were serving a country who didn't even see them or value them, and they weren't wrong about that.
Right.
But yes, this is primarily about what it means to be black and what black identity is. And as you mentioned earlier, Mark, there's this shift in thinking about how people are going to wear their hair, what clothing they're going to wear, and even what it means to be black. And so one of the things that I thought was really fascinating was when the different bands were coming on, and some of them were struggling with, like, are we black enough? Right. And there was the band from St. Louis. What's the band that sings the dawning of the age of Aquarius and that band, like, you're from St. Louis, Missouri, like me from Missouri. They're from St. Louis, Missouri, and they struggle with the fact that people didn't think their sound was black enough. And so one of the reasons that they came to Harlem, right, was to say, well, are they going to accept us?
Fifth dimensions.
That's right. Yeah. Are they going to accept us? And one of the reasons they were there is for that exact reason, to prove, hey, look, we are black, and that's a part of our identity. Right. And we're just because people associate us with a white sound doesn't mean that we're not being black enough.
Right.
And I thought that was really interesting.
I agree. And I think one of the singers said, this is my voice. So it is a black voice. They were being criticized for not sounding
black enough.
And she was like, well, this is my voice. This is how my voice sounds. I am a black person, and this is a black voice. And
there's not a black or a white sound, right? That's what how can you identify sound as black or white?
As a color,
what you said. Yeah, it's not a color.
It was a brilliant line. It was a beautiful line. And that's also what was sort of celebratory about the whole festival in general, is that that wasn't an issue. And it didn't matter if you were Gladys Knight and the Pips coming out in a full, matching outfits, or you were Sly and the Family Stone, who had white folks and a white dude playing the drums. What was that? And just wearing what felt right and really letting loose, up compared to this high choreographed from Gladys Knight and the Pips. So it's this beautiful mixture of everything, all of it getting celebrated.
Yeah. And that piece with Sly and the Family Stone, I thought was really interesting, because they were talking about in the movie how, most of the groups had been men's groups that wore suits and ties, and how Sly and the Family Stone kind of broke that a little bit and came out with breaking all kinds of barriers. And that the band itself, I think they said the music was the lowest common denominator or something. Music was the denominator that it was about, right? But he was taking a stand on all kinds of things. Right. So you got this woman playing the trumpet, which they hadn't seen before. They were mismatched. And you're right, they had black folks as a part of the band and white folks as a part of the band, and they were making a statement. They were playing music, and their music was making a statement, but the band itself was making a statement about the cultural point where they were. Yeah. And that was cool.
It was. Yeah. And they said something that has been a part of my brain for a long time. Yeah. And I've always sworn that Prince was influenced by Sly. And they literally called him Proto Prince. I was like, aha!
Yeah, I mean, he's wearing the glasses too, the purple glasses, and that was the best shot.
You can hear it in his voice. He's just like Prince in that he plays all these instruments. He's so talented. And so it's not surprising that they would call him Proto Prince, but also you can just hear the influence in what Prince does. But I didn't mean to go on too much.
I know you're a Prince fan. I you're a huge Prince fan. So I'm glad you brought that out. Yeah. Hey, one of the things I thought was cool too was the thought about how the different genres melded together at this, and that people didn't get too didn't get too wrapped up in the style of music that was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about that theologically too, because I was thinking about how many churches get wrapped up in music style and in the types of music that we're playing in worship. And I thought one of the things that's really cool about this is that it was all about the people who were there together and about what they were doing.
Yeah.
And it wasn't about people had their preferences, right? Some people came to just see whoever, but it was about the movement that was happening there. And I thought that was cool, and that's a prophetic word to a lot of churches who only care about music style.
Oh, it absolutely, no doubt about it. And lots to be learned there. Listen, to the folks who are watching and following along live, please, wherever you're watching, drop a question into the comment section there for our final segment of the show. We'll be getting to that. But first, we're going to have another drop, come back, and talk a little bit about some of the theological and political impacts that this show talks to and should have in the world.
Yeah. Welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show, where we are talking about the Summer of Soul, or When Revolution Could Not Be Televised, which is a very appropriate subtitle for this segment of the show, where we're going to be talking about theopolitical kinds of issues. And man, this film was packed with those kind of issues.
It's kind of the amazing part of this film is that, you know, on one level, it is a documentary about a music festival.
Right.
But there are so many pieces. It's not just, I mean, we talk about some of the Black culture stuff.
Yeah.
And the theological, political stuff still is specifically about Black culture. But there's so many levels of it, so many issues that they touch on and are speaking to as the festival's going on. And somehow keeping this amazing, hopeful note through speaking of all these terrible realities that, frankly, I'm sure you were struck by the fact that most of what they were talking about, we're still talking about.
Yeah, it's amazing how similar the cultural conversation is, and kind of depressing. You would hope that we would have come a little further, but we haven't. And so one of the places where that really kind of landed home for me was the moon landing took place during this festival.
Yeah, on the day of one of the, it was only on Sundays, and the moon landing happening on the Sunday.
That's right. And so some reporter said, "Hey, there are a bunch of Black people up in Harlem gathering for a festival. Let's go see what they think about the moon landing." And so they went, and they're like, "Hey, what do you think about the moon landing?" And they're like, "Well, I guess that's great for some people, but we've got these huge systemic problems. We've got people starving. We've got this economic disparity, and we're wasting money sending people to the moon." Okay, and so that's a conversation that we have heard in the last few months as we've seen celebrities going on these kind of voyeuristic trips to space and wasting money through Elon Musk's program to send these folks to space.
Right.
As we've heard the same kind of criticism, right? We've got this huge economic disparity in our country today, and we've still got all of these issues. And instead of using our money to address that, we're using money to
I mean, for me, the powerful moment was they interviewed one of the Black men that was there, and he said, you spent all this money to put men on the moon, when you could have used that same money to feed Black children who aren't able to eat.
Yeah, I mean that puts it in perspective.
That's pretty straightforward right there, and it's pretty good logic too. It's like, like at what point do the people become more important than this? I mean, I'm not saying, I mean, moon landing was amazing. We learned lots of science advanced. We got all kinds of stuff, but we weren't feeding people here on the planet. So maybe we needed to get our priorities a little more checked.
And honestly, I had never thought about it from that perspective before. I had thought about, the recent trips to space, and I thought, yeah, that's a waste of money, of private funds that people should be using to help others. But I had never thought about the moon landing just because of my own social location. I had always thought, oh yeah, moon landing, that's great. Look at the advancement of science that we're doing. And it occurred to me that that's because of who I am, that I didn't think to ask questions like, and why didn't we spend those millions of dollars to ensure that people could eat?
Absolutely.
When people are starving in the streets.
Yeah. And, I want to go back to the point of, while it was just uplifting, the music was so amazing, and it was wonderful to see the event and see all the people participating and what it meant to them. It was depressing that every time they talked about one of the political issues, we realized, well, we still, like, one of the issues was the economic divide. This, and so you would have thought, and maybe not, maybe, obviously this is part of why this gets buried. One, there's so many things going on. It's hard. I'm trying to.
There's a lot to unpack here.
Trying to stack them up.
Right.
But for instance, that economic divide, you would hope that in the amount of time that has passed, we would have done something about it. Well, here's a very interesting statistic. The 400 richest people in the United States have more money than all Black families collectively.
That's so immoral.
Right.
It's terrible. It's terrible. And we continue to see this widening economic gap, and we continue to see this exploitation, especially of people of color. But we see this widening social gap, and people without much having less, and people with more continuing to accumulate more and more wealth. And I mean, like, Jesus had talked about that, right? Like, it's immoral to see these kinds of economic disparity. And
it's one of the biggest points of what we should be doing,
right?
As Christians,
and points in the gospel.
Exactly, it's like one of the biggest things that's there.
That's like what Jesus talked about
intentionally. And I think exploitation, the word that you used, I think is so very important and so very real, because it is intentional exploitation. And I think it's part of why this movie wasn't shown and got trashed, because what you had in this event was Black culture getting together to express their disgust with how many political things, from the prison systems to economic divide to the way the police imagine this, the way that police were attacking Black men and shooting them from behind, that kind of thing.
Right. They had Black Panthers policing.
Policing, because the police weren't sure that they were going to do it. They did finally show up. But so you've got all of these things going on. They're gathering to speak out about it, to gather together and to unite over it. But they're doing it through music and through joy. I think that felt very dangerous to a lot of white folks.
Oh, of course.
It's much more effective to talk about the angry Black man than it is to talk about the reasonable Black man who's addressing these issues and still managing to find hope in the midst of it. That's a great reason for a white oligarch to crash it and make sure that it doesn't stay around. And I think one of the beautiful, I got one last piece I want to sneak in here.
Tell me.
And I think this, watching it through the second time, was when I heard this quote. It was Al Sharpton. And I think this capsulizes everything that's going on in the show.
Yeah, he has some great quotes.
He has some great ones. This one in particular about Nina Simone, I thought just nailed exactly what's going on. He said, Nina Simone sung that, and that was the song To Be Young, Gifted and Black, sung that in her tone that is somewhere between hope and mourning. And he says a couple of things. Then he goes on and says, you could hear her voice, in her voice, our pain and our defiance. For me, that's why no one wanted the show.
Yeah, and you can hear in her voice. Her voice is so powerful. And that struck me too whenever he said that. I'm like, yeah, he's right. And you're right. This festival was powerful for that reason. And Gladys Knight, I think put it best in the show. She said it wasn't just about the music; we wanted progress, and the whole festival was centered around music, but was about progress. One of the things that struck me as they were talking about that is how religion was intertwined with this, which I mean, I was kind of expecting, I think, but to see how overtly the religion was in there was kind of powerful.
Questlove is religious in his own way, so it wasn't surprising. And he spoke to the fact that he went through 40 hours of tape to get this hour and 50 minutes. And,
I imagine.
And he realized, but he did realize that the heart of this documentary was the gospel music.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And Al Sharpton talked about it too. He said, the gospel was more than religious. The gospel was therapy for the stress and pressure of being Black in America. We didn't go to a psychiatrist. We didn't go on a couch. We didn't know anything about a therapist, but we knew Mahalia Jackson. And to talk about how, the music was church, and church was the music, and that for a long, long time, and still maybe even today, that the church was the only safe place for self-expression and freedom. And that's why religion ended up being such a central part of the civil rights movement, is because it was a place where people could gather unmonitored and be who they were without having to worry about who was watching or what they were saying. And so this festival ended up functioning in a very similar way. It ended up kind of being church. And that was pretty cool. I liked, I thought it was powerful and kind of unexpected for me that Jesse Jackson was up there praying. He was featured in, a lot of the film. And the moment where he starts praying and he says, it doesn't matter who your God is. It doesn't matter who you worship. We're all here today. We're all a part of this community. We're all working for the same thing. And it was this religious overtone, but it was about this kind of universalist thing, how we're all working together for the common good.
Absolutely. And it was brilliantly put together by him. But it also makes me think of how brilliantly put together the film was, because for instance, we had the quote from the gentleman who said, look, you're putting men on the moon, but you could have been using that money to feed children that are hungry. And one of the reasons that Jesse Jackson was there was because of Operation Breadbasket, which was exactly there. So it was like, okay, y'all are putting people on the moon. And we're out there trying to feed kids that are hungry. That was the reason Jesse Jackson was there was Operation Breadbasket. I thought it was just a brilliant piece of filmmaking. I think Questlove is his first outing as a producer.
That's amazing.
I'm just blown away.
Yeah.
And he was hesitant. He was hesitant. He wasn't sure he wanted to. He had inferiority complex. He was like, I shouldn't be doing. You should have asked Spike Lee or somebody like that to do this. But he's pulled off.
He did a phenomenal job. It was incredible to see how he did this and how he tied all of the stuff together.
Oh yeah, just a little quick side story. I thought it was really funny. He said, so once he was finally convinced to do this, first of all, he didn't believe it. He didn't believe it at all. Some people came up to him backstage of the Tonight Show before they went on. He's the band leader for the Roots, who do the Tonight Show. They came up to him and said, "Hey man, we've got the 40 hours of footage of this festival that 300,000 Black folks went to in Harlem," and he was like, "You're not gonna fool me." Like he's music geek, like he said. People look at me like I'm some kind of all know. He's like, if I don't know about it, it didn't happen.
No.
And then they showed him some footage. They showed him some footage. He realized what was really going on. He took it home, and for I can't remember how long he said, but it was weeks. He put it on every screen in his house, nonstop loop. That's all he did. He just let it play, and every time something gave him goosebumps or connected with him, he wrote it down. And it's brilliant how he's managed to get those 40 hours into this almost perfect little piece of history and storytelling and documentation. It's just brilliant, and I really like it. You talk about. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, me too, and I hope that you all out there watch it if you haven't seen it, and watch it before the Oscars. The Oscars
Yeah.
are coming up. Make sure you see it.
It's nominated as best documentary, feature, not the short, but the feature. Yeah. I would be very surprised if it doesn't win. It got the right buzz at the right time as people were voting, and it's a brilliant piece of film. It talks like this is a film about coming together, and particularly in the Black community, but it expands into people of color and particularly historically underrepresented folks of color. And before we go to the drop, a reminder to everybody to ask questions. But I want to finish with this quote that kind of is about what this whole thing was about in terms of the actual event. This comes from Puerto Rican percussionist Ray Barreto, and he said, "We've got to do it together before it's too goddamn late."
Yeah.
And I was like, exclamation point, period. There we go. That's it right there. All right. I tell you what, I'm gonna take us to a drop, and we'll come back and see if we have any questions. If not, I know we've got questions for each other.
That's right, we do. Welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. We are at our last section where we are going to ask and answer some questions. And I haven't seen many questions come through, so I've got a question for you, Mark.
Shoot,
so one of the things that struck me was they gave this litany of profound losses that had occurred throughout the 1960s, right? They said
particularly losses of leaders that the Black community identified with as, this is our leader. This is the person who is speaking for us. And they weren't like Robert Kennedy was one of them, JFK.
Right. So that struck me.
Martin Luther King, Malcolm
X, right? Yeah. They gave that exact litany, those four people. And I mean, it kind of struck me that the Kennedys were included in that. I mean, I recognize that they were a large part of the civil rights movement, but for them to be a part of the litany, the same four names I heard a couple of times, JFK, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., RFK, which got me thinking, who are our biggest civil rights leaders today? Or Mark, who are people that you're looking to as kind of political and theological leaders?
I mean, the number one guy for me is the Reverend Dr. William Barber.
I somehow knew you were going to say that.
He's from North Carolina, so and I've had the opportunity to hang out and talk with him.
And the disciple of Christ, minister.
Disciple of Christ. Is there anybody else I know that's a disciple of Christ?
I
can't quite remember. It feels like I do. Feels like I do. They're all about the same anyway. No, but I mean, when he was the president of the North Carolina
the Council of Churches,
not Council of Churches, but the NAACP.
Oh, the NAACP.
And he would do annual marches that were crazy turnout. His intellect, his ability to speak in a way that connects with people. He is able to go full on gospel and make folks who are atheists be good with it. Like I don't have to believe to hear the truth in the way you're telling that and feel like there's something we need to do about it.
Yeah. So he speaks that same truth to religious people who might otherwise be like, well, I don't know what we should do. So I am the disciples minister Mark was referring to.
Oh, yeah, that's right. It was you.
Oh, yeah. I knew it. So at the General Assembly in 2013, we had two resolutions that could have been controversial. One was about LGBT inclusion. Okay. And Martin Luther King incarnate almost. William Barber.
Easy switch. It's an easy switch.
I mean, he had those moments, right? The same kind of moments.
He does.
So William Barber.
You hear echoes of Dr. King in almost every talk he gives.
I mean, it's emotional to hear him speak for that reason, I think. So William Barber gets up and he speaks in favor of these things. And we passed this resolution on Black Lives Matter. And it's like William Barber gets up to speak, and everyone's like, well, William Barber, the prophet of God, has spoken.
Right.
we know where we should. And the same thing happened. I think it was 2015. We elected our first Black woman as general minister and president, and he got up and spoke in favor. And it's like, oh, William Barber has spoken. Yeah. We know how we should vote on this.
Well, and here's the great thing about him. And it leads to my question for you.
Yeah, tell me.
He is a great orator. He is a brilliant mind, and he speaks to social justice issues, which ultimately is what the Summer of Soul is about: social justice issues and positive ways of coping with the inequalities, but also in getting people ready to go do something about it. And that's one of the things I love about Dr. Barber. He doesn't just talk about it. He's out there actually doing the work. He's got organizations put together. He's figuring out strategies how to get out.
Yeah.
So my question is, and I knew just because of the nature of a podcast and the nature of documentary that we wouldn't quite get to this, what do we do? How do we respond? Because we've talked about it. We've said that all of that's wrong, and it's just horribly frustrating that we've made so little progress.
Yeah.
It's fine to say all that stuff and recognize. As a matter of fact, it's necessary. We've got to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right.
But
what do we do?
If it stops there, it is worth nothing.
Not a thing. Right.
So what do we do? What do we do?
Well, I think your answer is great. That getting involved with the Poor People's Campaign is a great place to start, which is the organization that William Barber is co-chair of. I think Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris is the other co-chair, and she, if I'm not mistaken, is a Presbyterian minister.
I believe so.
So I think that getting involved with an organization like that, where you can see what the organization has laid out as goals. And one of the things I admire about the Poor People's Campaign is that it recognizes the intricacies of economic disparity and poverty, that it recognizes that race is involved, it recognizes that climate change is involved, and that those are all points that the Poor People's Campaign is working towards addressing. But it's not just rhetoric, it's actual concrete action. There are pieces of legislation that they are advocating for. There are movements that you can participate in. There are actions you can participate in at state houses. So it's national and it's localized, which is something that I think is pretty incredible about this grassroots organization, is that you're not just coming forward to work for national policies. You are doing that, but you're also working for policies that directly impact us at a local level.
Right. And that's the real power of the movement. It's where real change will ever actually happen. So really, really incredibly important. So plugging into organizations that are already figuring out how to do this, but also I'm going to go back. If you haven't heard our previous podcast on Don't Look Up, I'm going to go back to one of the things we concluded with there. There are lots of things you can do, small things, write letters, join voting, man. Vote for the people who will enforce these changes that will work towards true equality. It is very hard as an individual to make big changes unless a whole bunch of individuals get together and vote for the right person.
Right. And that's the reason that Robert Kennedy and John F. Kennedy are included in that litany of names.
Absolutely.
Because they were working for legislation that helped people, right? They're not just talking and beyond, white folks just marching. It was about real concrete change that needed to happen at a legislative level. So vote! Get out there and vote.
Go vote. And if you haven't seen Summer of Soul, please go watch it. You will not be disappointed. It is well worth. You will be joyful. You'll be sad, but ultimately you'll be inspired. It's more than worth a watch. Hey, Caleb, it's always great hanging out. Cheers to you, sir.
Cheers, Mark. Mine's gone.
you made it. Well,
both of mine are gone.
I reloaded, so it's fair. But thank you all for joining us and tuning in. And until next time, we'll see you again on the Moonshine
Jesus Show.
Moonshine